So you all know the answer to this. I'm not going to ask you to say the answer to this, but but I want to check and make sure that we're all starting on the same page. You all know what it means to assume, right? Okay, just wanted to make sure we're starting out in the right place because this, excuse me, don't know where that came from. This is a season that is full of assumptions, isn't it? I mean, think about it for a second. Like, I'm going to play the stereotypes for a second, but guys, we all know, we assume that we know very much what it is that our wives and the women in our lives want for Christmas, right? They all want a vacuum cleaner, don't they? And moms, you know what your kids or your grandkids want for Christmas, right? They all want underwear and socks. And dads, or kids, well, the kids aren't up here, but I'm going to assume for them because they aren't here to speak. Well, Lily could speak for herself, but she might give me a very different answer. But kids, we all know what dads want, right? It is a handcrafted artisanal tie made with all of the very best puff paint and macaroni, right? I mean, we can make all sorts of assumptions about where we are at this time of year. But you all know what you really want. Moms, wives, what do you can answer this if you want, or if you don't want to answer it, make sure your husband's guessed well. What do you really want for Christmas? See, funny story about that. Emily has wanted for a while, like a steam mop, like a Bissell steam mop that we can use in our kitchen and some other places and do really good. And like, okay, I know this, I'm going to get it for her, but I'm like, I don't want to play the stereotypes. I'm not going to get it for her birthday, and I'm not going to get it for Christmas. And I talked to her about it, said, I'm going to get this for you, but I don't want to do it for these things because, that's I don't want to be that guy. So Black Friday came, we got her steam mop, and I don't know if this is ironic or what this is, but we had some birthday money saved back, and she used some of her birthday money to buy a steam mop for herself. And she really, truly did want that. Dads, what do you really want for Christmas?
Floor mats for my car.
Floor mats for your car. I'm not surprised by that at all. And kids, we all, like, if we really thought about it, we know what the kids will want. Probably something having to do with money, with a screen, or with something that will move them from one place to another much more quickly than they can by their own 2 feet, right? There's all sorts of things. We can go beyond those assumptions. But assumptions make up a lot of who we are, though. Like, we can't go a day probably without making some assumptions about things. We have to, because we just don't know all of it that's out there. And so we know that at this time of year, we're just going to have things that are going to be assumed. And we just try to be good about it. I mean, because I know that I can assume at this time of year, if I turn on the Hallmark Channel, I know what that movie is going to look like, right? Small town girl makes it big in the big city, goes back home for some reason. Car breaks down probably, or gets snowed in, and meets this really attractive guy who helps her out in the midst of the troubles, and he has some sort of kitschy job in town, like a baker or a candle maker or a cabinet maker or, I'm trying to think what the, organic underwater basket weaver up in the Great Lakes. I mean, they go back, they do that. They fall in love in the course of 72 minutes, so in a 90-minute time frame, you have plenty of room for commercials. And at the very end, the twist of the story is that the guy's like really a billionaire somewhere, and they live happily ever after. I mean, that sounds like a Hallmark movie, doesn't it? Then they have about 6 different actors that play in all of those movies. One of my favorite parts about this particular season of Advent is I've seen some of the memes going around that describe what happens if you play a Hallmark movie backwards. Kind of like what happens if you play a country song backwards and you get your dog back, your wife back, your truck back, your house back, all of those sorts of things. But the Hallmark movie meme goes like this. So I watched the Hallmark movie backwards. A woman in an ugly Christmas sweater dumped her loser small-town boyfriend to pursue a law career in New York City, where she lived happily ever after in pencil skirts and amazing shoes. Now, all of that is kind of a ridiculous way of getting into things this morning, isn't it? But it actually is, it's really surprisingly important because this is exactly what John the Baptist was doing. He was naming all of the assumptions of folks that they had as he was beginning his ministry. And so he starts, we get this wonderful verse out of our reading. And this is the lectionary reading for this Sunday. This wasn't just me like picking this part of Matthew's Gospels and John starting his ministry. There's a reason we do this big time jump forward, generally for about the second Sunday of Advent. So we get to this part, so we see what it means for someone to come and prepare the way. And John, in talking to the folks that have gathered around him, makes this comment. He says, "Do not presume to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our ancestor.' For I tell you, God is able from these stones to raise up children for Abraham." This is John's really nice way of saying to these folks that were gathered around him, saying, you all think you know a lot about what's going on here, but if you aren't careful, these assumptions are going to get you into trouble, and all you're going to get from Santa for this Christmas are a bunch of socks. And not the nice socks that everybody wants, the funny, silly socks, but these are going to be the 100 pair to a pack for $1 at Walmart white tube socks. That's what you're going to get if y'all aren't careful. This is he's saying, you guys, watch for this. You're missing something here. We're going to shorten this up even just a little bit more. Just go to this phrase. Do not presume. The people that were around John thought that they knew what the Messiah was going to be. More importantly, they assumed that they were on the right side of it, that they knew what they were doing. The people that were gathered around John at this particular point were a bunch of Pharisees and Sadducees. There were some others, but these were the ones he was directly talking to. So meaning the very good church-going people who assumed that they were on the right side of things. And they assumed that because they were so very sure of themselves. And they had reason to be. They knew who they were. They knew they had their theology worked out to the very last detail. They knew that they would, because they had the genealogies to work this out, that they were the inheritors of the promise God gave to Abraham. They knew these things. And these things were good. And it's at this point, John is giving them the look that says, y'all have one more chance to fix your thinking, because y'all ain't anywhere close to what's actually going on here. And why weren't they close? John lays it out for him. He makes this comment. He says, if all God wanted was children of Abraham, he could raise up these stones to be children of Abraham. Reminding them God is not bound by our... There we go. That's what was causing that. They are not bound. God is not bound by our understanding of the world, by their understanding of the world and how it works. Ultimately, that has always been what gets us in trouble. Whenever we look at Scripture and we see the people of Israel or we see the Jewish people getting into trouble, it's probably because they have presumed too much somewhere along the way. And because this is something that they often do. And there's this very fine line between the things that we know and the things that we assume that we know because we know these things. You know, that logical string that we put together. We know this, therefore I'm going to put some things together. We assume that we also know X over here, right? We do that, don't we? And this is something and we have to do this because that's how we get along in the world. But we have to remember that this is a very fine line, that if we aren't careful, sometimes, excuse me, sometimes what happens is that, Janice, would you give me a bottle of water back there? Thank you. Excuse me, I don't know where all of a sudden my throat decided it was going to get a little bit of a tickle in there. But we have these times, we get these assumptions in place where there's that line that if we aren't careful, after a while we have assumed something to be true for so very long. Oh, thank you so very much. We have assumed something to be true for so very long that we just take it as fact now. You ever done that? Thought that you have known something? I do this a lot when I'm trying to say a word for the very first time that I have only ever read in a book. Like, I think I've read it so many times, like, I know how this word sounds until I open my mouth in front of someone who actually knows better, and they're like, that's not how you say that word. But yeah, it is. This is how I've always said it. I've never said that word a day in my life. But that's where it goes. That's what the Pharisees and the Sadducees were running into. They assumed that because they knew God, that whatever else they could tie to that knowledge was also going to be true. We tell the story of John the Baptist in Advent because John is the messenger. He is the one who's coming to prepare the way for the real Messiah. The real Messiah who will be born in a manger to a young woman, who anyone looking in from the outside on this young family would start to make some assumptions about them. Right? I mean, y'all can probably hear some of those comments that are coming out already. You know, you have someone who, they aren't really married yet, but they've got a kid. So folks are already going to start making assumptions about Mary. They're going to make assumptions about Joseph in there too, because he didn't do the right thing by divorcing her. He is still sticking with her in the middle of this. So they're making assumptions about him, and they're going to make assumptions about who Jesus is. Remember, later on in Jesus' life and his ministry, they'll call him out on that again. They'll say, well, we know who his parents are. You know, what good can he do when Jesus is back in his hometown? They've made all of these assumptions. There is a humility that we don't often see that we absolutely need in our religious assumptions and presumptions. There's a humility that we need as we go into all of that because as John reminds them, if God wanted, he could always raise up more children of Abraham. God can always raise up new scholars, leaders, pastors, speakers, evangelists, teachers, prophets, church members, etc. He can always raise up more people. God comes in this humble form, in the form of a baby in a manger, because he doesn't have to demonstrate his power and his greatness. God comes in this way to show us what true peace looks like, that it's not in power and it's not in authority, that it's not in those things. Peace, as God is showing us, is not a cessation of conflict, but it is saying that peace can even be found in the midst of the conflict. This is the peace that in Psalm 122 that we get that says, peace be within your walls and security within your towers. A peace based not on a foundation of assumptions that all have to be true. Because here's the thing about assumptions. Assumptions generally are always built on the back of other assumptions. And somewhere along the way there is one bit of truth in the midst of that. But if you pull one card out of that, the whole thing can come falling down. But he offers us a peace not based on those assumptions. But he says this is a peace where everything else can fall apart, but this will still be true. Peace in the light is a peace that knows God with us, that knows no assumptions or presumptions, that doesn't have to hold on to a lot of other things to be true, that says, be still and know that I am God. This is a peace that says you can still go and do great things, or you can still go and do even just normal things, but you can do them with the purpose that comes from that sustaining presence of God with us. This is a peace that says in the good times, when we are happy and excited, God is there celebrating with us. It's a peace that says when everything is wrong and things are bad and we don't feel like we have the strength to go on, Jesus says, let me hold on to this and we'll figure this out together. It is a peace that says in trying times when we have to figure things out and we have to do things maybe we have never done before or learn things we have never learned before and to do all of that, this is a peace where the Spirit says, let me help you with this. And it's even a peace that in the very simplest of times says, You can have simple times even. How often do you hear that in our society today, where if something is easy and you're having a good time and it's not very hard, you don't feel like you're waiting for that other shoe to drop. God says even in those times, you can have simple and easy times and it's okay. Just know that I'm there with you. And all of this comes because we find that peace that comes from the child who will be born, who comes in unexpected ways, defying all of the assumptions anyone had about him, and sets us on a new path. Let us be a people that finds that peace that comes from Jesus Christ, and let us share in that peace in this day and all the days to come, and let us do this in his name. Amen.